queria primeiro fazer uma introdução. A Philippa Benson é gerente editorial da Science Advances, que é a primeira revista de acesso aberto da AAAS, que é da Science. E ela foi lançada em fevereiro de 2015, então um pouco mais de 2 anos. Ela trabalha há mais de 25 anos em publicação científica e lançando revistas, construindo programas editoriais.
Consultancy to editors without non-profit organizations, Wildlife Society, Conservation International, Information Demo. She also worked intensely with issues related to author qualification, and she's the co-author of a book called What Editors Want, a local guide to scientific journal publishing, published by the University of Chicago Press. Also, this book was also published in China in Mandarin. She's postgraduate from the Cornell University. I had the pleasure to meet her in person in the beginning of the month in Boston. And Philippa, we're going to start watching a video, a little bit more of 15 minutes, what she presented in the annual meeting of SSP in Boston, and then she's already watching us. She's going to give a little bit more context about this presentation, and then she's going to answer questions in real time. And then we have the lecture about XML. So there's a lot of technology in this second session. I hope everything works well. So this presentation focuses to make our authors understand what is the role of the editors in this entire process. There's a little bit of conflict, which we're going to talk about here. So I'd like to the technical people here to let the video go. If we can turn off the lights and play the video, please, for the presentation. Thank you.
Hi, my name is David, and I'm a publisher. The first step to solving a problem is admitting you have a problem, and the publishers in this room, we have a problem. We think what we do is important, but we have a really hard time just explaining the value that we add. We've been continuously attacked by often very angry advocates for various causes for many years now, so much so that most of us have been completely frightened away from even the vaguest notion of sticking our heads up above the trenches and, God forbid, drawing any attention to ourselves. Flying beneath the radar does have some advantages as a strategy. It lets others take the heat instead of you, but it also comes with some powerful disadvantages as it lets others control the conversation and define who you are. We're at a societal inflection point. In many ways, this has provided us with a perfect opportunity for us to tell our story. We're inundated with propaganda and marketing masquerading as fact. And now more than ever, the value of careful curation and editorial oversight is being recognized as vital to a healthy society. So if you've been looking for a simple and foolproof narrative to explain just what it is we do and why it's important, this is your chance, and I urge all to sort of come out of hiding and let your voice be heard. We're also at an era of increased regulation around the publication activity of researchers. A recent poll, however, showed that more than half of the researchers polled did not know their own funders' policies. We're asking researchers to do more. We're instituting complex policies around the reuse of different versions of papers at different times. We're asking researchers to make these critical decisions around things like copyright. As publishers, we spend all of our time immersed in these issues, so much so that they become like the air that we breathe, and we assume that everyone else understands them just as we do. But publishing is at best a peripheral activity for researchers, something that takes them away from their real work of actually doing research. So there are a lot of questions around what can we do to help drive better awareness of the things that we think researchers need to know.
I am Philippa Benson. I am the managing editor of Science Advances, which is AAAS's open access journal. We call it the expansion of science. But previous to this iteration of my profession, I began my career as an academic, doing research on how scientists write from a psychological perspective, what they consider when they're constructing and revising text. I've also worked as the director of author services for vendors who help authors with writing tasks, with picking journals, with understanding the publishing process. I'll give you a little overview of where I've done some of that work. And I've led editorial offices in places other than AAAS, at NGOs, at small societies, and now at a relatively larger society. And I'm also an author, and I've taught an awful lot. So I have spent a lot of time with authors and thinking about how they think and feel. So this session is about finding our voices as publishers and how we connect with authors. So we're up here in the scholarly kitchen. We're up here at the top of the ranks. And our question is, can you hear me? Why don't we have, when I met with David and Tom, they were like, why aren't more people participating in the scholarly kitchen? And that was a good question. So the question we were asking is, how do we address this problem of connecting and communicating with the research community? It's a premise that we have. Why don't people really understand us? And why don't they care to understand us? The question is, how can we make them understand that we are important shining stars in their universe? So one of the things I want to do, and forgive me for those of you who have seen my little model here in the past, but this is how I think authors see their universe and their communication challenges. So of course it all starts with funding. They've got to get some funding. So let's say it begins. And I'm happy to share this slide with anybody. And when they're conducting their research, their audiences are the people in their institutions who give them the resources that they need to do their work. That's who they communicate with. And at some point they have to write it up, but they're still doing it in the context of their institution and their colleagues. And when they're getting ready to submit for publication, they start to think about this different audience, who they're going to engage in, and they start to decide, who is it? Where are they going to publish? And what do they care about that publisher? And I've spent a lot of time thinking about how do you engage there. And then when they get in, they have to go through this dance of revision with the publisher, with the community of people who are critiquing their work, and with their colleagues. And then it gets through, and they care about disseminating it through social media, through other venues that that publication gets to. And then it goes out, and it's debated and changed, and they come up with new questions, and then they apply for more funding to answer the new questions. That's the world, the communication world that authors live in. And it's all relatively evenly distributed at each stage. I tend to think that they're doing this when someone is at this stage in pursuit of tenure and promotion. They're going through this. Yes, they want knowledge. Yes, they want to find new information. They want to make the world a better place or push forward the boundaries of the human experience, but they're also, at the end of the day, they want tenure and promotion. They want a job in their hands. Would you agree? Now, the publisher's view. You can see there's a few things different here. One is that publishers think about publishers a lot. Would you agree?
Absolutely.
And when I got up here, I just felt like saying ditto to what Tom said. You know, that's the end of my presentation. Ditto, same thing. A lot of our messages are right on target, and we didn't plan beforehand. But one of the key differences here in publishers' views of the world is that the core of it is that information must be vetted to be valuable. We try and avoid fake news. That's what the gears of our industry is about. How do we make sure that that which we put forward as knowledge has some resonance of truth to it? That's what all those gears that we do behind the scenes are meant to sort of clean out. So, what are some of the things that we can do to help authors understand those gears? So we can try and get to authors when they're students. So you can find, for undergraduates and graduates, writing courses or courses about scientific expression in language at undergraduate and graduate levels given through English departments. Not so great, maybe, because in part they're being taught by people who really don't understand the curriculum. Or writing across the curriculum courses, courses that are taught in content courses by scientists, most of whom have very little idea how to teach about writing or publishing. And still, those audiences are students, whether they're undergraduate or graduate. They are a captured audience, but they have no context of real life. They're not in that cycle of knowledge production that I talked about before. When you get to talk about authors as professionals, there are a lot of opportunities out there. There are a lot of efforts out there. They're offered by publishers. They're offered by societies, professional societies. They're offered by not-for-profit vendors. And they're done both domestically and internationally, in the US, in Europe, and elsewhere. I think some of the SSP sessions are going to be rebroadcast in other countries. But all of this makes for a cacophony of voices. They're coming from a lot of different places. And they're not always wholly unified messages, and they come at disparate times. So I'm just going to give you a couple of examples of things that I've done in this effort. I published a book, What Editors Want, and it tries to show authors the editor's perspective on why we ask authors to do things that we ask them to do. And we talk about, my co-author, Sue Silver from the Ecological Society of America, and I talk about data requirements. We talk about ORCID. We talk about COPE. We talk about all the different things that as editors we care about. Now that book has sold okay, but not great, not a bestseller. I've published things. Lots of little articles here and there about what you should and shouldn't do. Got a couple of downloads. I found out I had 18 tweets about it. 18 tweets. That's not a lot of pickup. I've been all over China. I was going to put dots of all the cities I'd been to, and then I realized I'd lost track. So I've been all over China, and I've lectured widely in the United States. Little things of how to succeed in publishing. And I've also, this picture on the bottom right is one of the lectures I've given to editors in China who are required by the government to have continuing education on how to keep up and understand and engage with international priorities and trends and requirements in STM publishing. Just for giggles, I also thought I'd put this up when I went to North Korea to teach scientists there. It wasn't a particularly receptive audience. A lot of time was spent literally kowtowing, and also I thought I'd share that. I don't know if you can see the little graphic. That was on an orphanage wall. So I was lucky to come in, and I was lucky to get out. But I was invited. I was invited to go to talk about standards and practices in publishing to North Korean scientists. So there is an appetite there. But what I found out through all my outreach at the end of the day is what people want to know about is, what is your impact factor? I want to publish in some place that is a high impact factor. All the things that people complain about is largely overridden. You can debate with me on this, but that's been my experience. So authors still really don't know what they don't know. They don't know all the gears behind the things that we do to try and ensure that the information that is published is true, new knowledge and has been gathered in ethical, sound ways. So we can educate authors when they're students. We can try and educate authors when they're professionals. And we can try and also educate more young publishing professionals. Now, that is preaching to the choir, but young choirs is how the culture of publishing will change. Now, chatter, all of this talking, doesn't equal change, just like open access isn't free. And that's still something, that basic idea that open access does not mean that the information is free, that has no cost. That idea is still misunderstood by authors. So we haven't permeated in with all the chatter, with all the tweets, with all the social media, with all the teaching. We're still not hitting at the right level to get the information across. So my idea is, if it's lonely at the top, if we can't hear our voices, we should move to a different place. We should be speaking in different arenas. So I put forward the idea that we should be going to and focusing on our education and our engagement at these different levels, and strategizing about how to get more continuous information to people, not when they're right at the stage of getting ready to publish or publishing, but when they're in their labs, when they're doing the work, when they're posing their questions in conferences and other things, when they're not in the midst of the publishing activity to get to them at these other points. So I do want to applaud SSP and the 25 committees and more that are being active and activated to try and get these kinds of efforts forward. And like David, like Tom, like our speakers earlier today, I think we should all be more engaged in these committees, but looking at other places where we can get information about the value that we add to authors. And so the question is, can you hear me now? If you are in the academy, talking to department chairs, talking to deans, talking to provosts, or talking to the people who will fill those seats and who will at some point start to value publications and information and research that has been communicated outside of a journal with a high impact factor. Now, of course, I want my journal, which does not yet have an impact factor, to have a high impact factor, so I'm really talking out the left side of my mouth. But anyway, that's all I have to say. So perhaps we'll find our voices if we speak together and focus more on audiences beyond ourselves. Thank you.
Ótimo. Então, essa foi a palestra da Filipa, que já está aí, ao vivo. Eu espero que ela esteja nos escutando e nos vendo. Ela está em Bethesda, right? É isso? Bethesda, Maryland. E está nos escutando. Agora ela vai fazer uma contextualização, apresentação especial para... Hi, Felipe.
Hello.
Técnicos, mas a gente chega lá. Chega lá.
Hello? I cannot hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we're all hearing you.
I cannot hear you. All right, are you ready for me to start? Alvaro, if you're ready for me to start, put your thumbs up. Okay. Are we ready to go? Okay. Are we ready to go?
Yeah.
Thumbs up? Okay, thank you. Hello, everybody from Washington, D.C. I very much wish I were there with you now. Perhaps sometime in the future I'll enjoy your company. I hope you liked my previous presentation that I gave at SSP a few weeks ago in Boston. And Alvaro has asked me to give you a little bit more information about science advances and about basically my thoughts about some of the things that I said in that previous presentation. So to start, I'll just give you a little bit more background about science advances. As you may know, Science, the mothership, we call Science the mothership, is a very old journal, started in 1880 by Thomas Edison. And the Science family of journals expanded first in 1999 with Science Signaling, and then with Translational Medicine in 2009. For a host of reasons, in 2015, Science Advances was launched, but a primary reason was to provide readers with open access to world-class science. AAAS is a not-for-profit, mission-driven publisher. And so starting an open access extension or expansion of science was very much aligned with our mission. Since then, last year, we also started science immunology and science robotics, and the drivers of that are for a different discussion. But those journals are both launched and doing well. Now, there are some critical differences between science and science advances beyond just the open access aspect of it. First and perhaps foremost is that Science Advances is led by academic editors. We now have 112 experts across a broad domain of topical areas that lead the journal. These experts are people whose primary jobs, their day jobs, are doing science, shaping science, directing science, and so they sort of have a little bit more tactile sense of what is hot, what is important in the field now. And this is different than desk editors who read a lot, who go out and give presentations and visit labs, but they're not quite as much in the trenches as academic editors. In addition, Science Advances strives for fast speed to publication. We try and publish within 30 days of accepting a paper. We also, unlike science, we allow for very long articles as well as very short articles. They all have to be either research articles or reviews. We don't have the front matter, the news stories, the perspectives, the editorials or opinion pieces that science does. Again, as I said, we cover a whole range of topics as broad, if not broader than science. And we are actively recruiting papers that are cross-disciplinary, multidisciplinary, research that in many instances doesn't have an easy home for it in other high-impact journals. So those are some of the other differences between science and Science Advances. Another aspect of this, of course, is that when a piece of research just doesn't quite hit the mark at science for any number of reasons, it can transfer to Science Advances, and we have a mechanism behind the scenes that makes that easy for authors. Of course, Nature and Cell and many other publishers have the same sort of cascading or transfer model, which in many ways is meant in service of authors who are striving again to get that publication. This is just a little bit, Alvaro asked me to tell you a little bit about my work as a managing editor. And you can see here that we have a pretty lean ship here. With the emphasis on this 101, like Dalmatians, the dogs, editorial board, and much of my work is coordinating and communicating with that board. I run a shop of editorial coordinators and assistants who also work directly with board members, and we collaborate and plan with the science editors as well. We call the other journals the sister journals. So there's a lot of collaboration with them as well. But increasingly and importantly, my interactions also have to do with these other aspects of managing a journal and promoting its content and critically promoting its standards and practices in terms of the many guidelines and COPE-related ethical practices that we want to educate authors about and that we are responsible for maintaining and enforcing. Let me see if I can. So, as I said in the earlier piece, authors don't know what they don't know. And part of our role as publishers is to help them understand where and how we add value. And the value at this point is not just peer review. Of course, peer review is critically important, but it is also ensuring that people understand and maintain standards of data quality, data availability, conflicts of interest, general ethical practices with, human subjects, environmental materials, general COPE processes, the Council for Publication Ethics. It is publishers who play a grounding, anchoring role in maintaining those standards. And increasingly, our roles are educating scientists and educating their institutions about what those evolving standards and practices are. And I'm very happy to share these slides if you'd like. So these are things that I feel are very important for the publishing community to take to heart and to make sure are central in their activities and seen as central in their activities. So some of these are the specifics of those standards for reproducibility that we need to educate authors about and enforce. How you cite sources, how you collect and present your data. If you think back to the slide I gave a few minutes ago, in my team, my editorial staff spends an enormous amount of time making sure that with every paper we publish, that as soon as we publish that data, that study, the data on which it is based is available to anybody else, which in an open access format is obviously immediately. Increasingly, the TOPS guidelines, and I have some resources down here at the bottom that you can go to, are pushing forward standards that people are open about the materials they use, about the design and analytical methods that they use, that particularly with human studies, that they're registered in advance so that it can be checked for adhering to guidelines, and also analysis plans. These are things that the editor-in-chief who founded Science Advances, Marcia McNutt, who is now at the National Academy of Sciences in the US, is pressing very hard for these guidelines and to get all kinds of publishers to sign on and align themselves with these standards and practices. And I'm happy to discuss these more if you'd like. Another thing, just briefly to talk about, is in our roles as editors, helping our authors to understand why articles are rejected. A lot of feedback that you get, particularly from the younger authors, less experienced authors, reflects that they do not understand some of these basics about how to publish. One of the biggest things, and I think those of you who have worked with journals that have a well-defined scope understand that you get a lot of materials that are simply outside of the scope of the journal. And both authors and publishers would save an enormous amount of time if just that issue of scope were clearly and convincingly conveyed to authors. Authors also are not clear about what is considered new. And I can go through all of these reasons that articles are rejected without review, but that these reasons are ones that are misunderstood or just simply not understood by authors. And it is the duty of the publishers to help make them these parameters clear so everybody uses their time efficiently. You know, another thing, I believe that all of you are familiar with ORCID, but I want to put in another plug, and I'm not doing this under any kind of solicitation, but I am a strong believer in the importance and the value of ORCID IDs, and I hope in your publishing efforts that you are either requiring these or on the road to requiring these, because many problems with searchability and findability and reproducibility will be addressed when people are able to be held clearly responsible for every aspect of work that they do in every publication that they put forward for public consumption. So I know that I have a limited time here. I'd be happy to talk to you more in Q&A about my thoughts on educating authors and publishers, and as I said in my earlier presentation, talking about where and how publishers can do that education to be more effective in their roles in maintaining ethical standards in publishing. So that's all I'll say for now. Thank you for your attention, and I look forward to discussion.
Hope you can hear me. 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 Hi, Felipe. I hope you can hear me now. 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 Okay. 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 Great. Thank you so much for your time there and experiencing technology. I think there was. Eu acho que foi bastante produtivo, bastante interessante esse ponto de vista que poucas vezes a gente discute ou coloca à frente nas reuniões. E vamos abrir para perguntas. Eu queria começar com uma pergunta. Não sei se ela está escutando, mas eu queria saber dela, pela sua experiência, se existe uma tendência negativa ou positiva da percepção pelos autores em relação ao trabalho das editoras. Ou seja, se está piorando ou está melhorando.
I cannot hear anything.
No. Can I ask? Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Do you hear me? Do you hear me?
I can hear you, but there's an echo.
Hear me? Hear me? Hear me? I'll ask again. If you think there is a trend, positive or negative trend,
I cannot hear.
Against the author's perception from publishers, as you have a long time working on that. No.
Can you hear me? Okay, so the question is, do I feel there's a trend, positive or negative, regarding authors' perception of publishers? That's a very difficult question to ask and answer. Why? Because I don't think that there is robust data on when you say authors' perceptions. We get feedback from the community that there are some very active authors who tweet and blog saying that authors charge too much and that peer review is a flawed system and all different kinds of negative things about publishers, all that we do wrong. At the same time, in correspondence that we have with authors, very prominent researchers, they give us feedback that a great
Pode falar.
Pergunta em inglês, você já escreve em inglês. Bom, em que ponto, eu queria saber, daquele slide que ela mostrou, né, com as checagens.
Who checks it, at what point, and who checks?
And who does it after submission?
Você está falando Science Advances. É isso mesmo.
Can you hear me okay?
I lost the question. Would you ask the question again, please?
Okay, thank you. I liked very much that slide with a lot of bullets with technical issues that has to be verified. I would like to ask you at which point those verifications occur after submission and who does them? Thank you.
So with Science Advances,
Mais algum? There's another one.
Yes. When you say to go to the labs to educate authors, how does it work? It's a training day. You organize a training day with the researchers. Do you talk to the head of office of the university?
I've done many different this in many different fashions. So I actually have a curriculum, and I have presentations I can give for. Audience is playing in that cycle, but also their levels and also their language backgrounds and their sort of, when I say cultural backgrounds, I mean the culture of the scientific community. So people working in smaller universities in the outback in China have different needs than people in Chicago, so to speak. Does that answer your question?
Yes. There's another one here.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Felipe, for the great presentation. As you may know, Brazilians have a limited proficiency in English, and many authors need to count on translation. And I would like to know what your opinion about the translators, in fact, as literacy brokers, and what the effects of translations in terms, in case of Brazil or China, for example, that people need translation. And I want your opinion about the impact of translation in publishing.
Acceptance.
Okay.
Okay.
That's a multifaceted question, and I'm happy, I'll take a stab at different aspects of it. I have a slide, and I haven't put it up, but if you look at that slide that I had of all the reasons that papers are rejected, only one or two of them have anything to do with language. So I know from working in all the different publishing houses that I've worked in, even if an article is poorly written, as long as the syntax can be deciphered, as long as it's comprehensible on some level, if the science is strong, if there is a good hypothesis that is soundly tested with robust data, if the language is poor, an editor is still going to want to work with that or with that author and take that article. They'll work hard. So the risk comes when you have a translator who is not savvy about scientific language, particularly with the important, very important parts of the article that are needed to get it into review. In my opinion, if an author gets an article into review, whether it's published or not, it should be counted as a success. because it means that it's gone out in the community for evaluation, for critique, for refinement. Please hold on 1 second. Sorry. So if someone gets a basic piece of information written in a way that it can be misunderstood, then it's a problem. And one of the challenges of non-native speakers of English who are looking at translation, they give a piece of text over to someone who isn't a knowledgeable scientific writer, editor, translator. And they look and say, oh, that syntax sounds good, but it may actually be able to be misread. So there's some, am I making sense to you here, what I'm saying?
Yep.
So there are real dangers in just kind of blithely handing something over to a translator. Now, if you have a very good translator, or a very good editor who's knowledgeable, somewhat knowledgeable about the topic, but is also knowledgeable, really knowledgeable, functionally bilingual, then there's value in it. But it has to be done mindfully and very carefully. So I don't know if I answered all your questions, but I tried.
I think it's fine. Is there anyone? Okay. Muito obrigado. Thank you so much. Muito obrigado. It was great and great experience to have you here in São Paulo. And have a good trip to Peru.
Thank you. And thank you all. I'll look forward to seeing you at some other point in real time.
Okay. Thank you so much. Ok. Eu acho que essa apresentação foi muito interessante aí para a gente e acho que muitas questões podem ser colocadas nas nossas revistas, nas nossas instituições até, principalmente, de pesquisa. E agora a gente está um pouco corrido, mas teremos tempo ainda para a apresentação do Bruce. O Bruce Rosenblum é da Inera. Ele possui mais de 30 anos de experiência projetando e implementando soluções digitais de publicação. Coordena todas as atividades de desenvolvimento da Inera, incluindo o design e o desenvolvimento do X-Styles, que é o produto carro-chefe da Inera. Também é consultor na implementação de workflows em XML para publicações. É coautor da DTD do JATS, então... e também desenvolveu o esquema de depósito de metadados para Crossref. Então, é um prazer imenso ter alguém com tamanha experiência e com tamanha capacitação para falar para a gente aqui no Brasil hoje. Então, convido o Bruce com mais algumas demandas de tecnologia aqui para apresentar para a gente. Por favor.
Okay, there we go. Wonderful. Thank you very much. Thank you to Alvaro, and congratulations on organizing this first, what I believe is the first international SSP regional meeting. It's quite an achievement, and I think it's an important indication of how international scientific publishing has become. When I first started working with SSP in 2002, so 15 years ago, it was strictly a US-focused organization. And also 15 years ago, a lot of research, and certainly 25 years ago, a lot of research was very nationally focused. I don't think Americans were seeing much research coming from places like Brazil or China or India. And correspondingly, the access for researchers here was much more difficult to information coming from other countries. And all of that's changed really because of the internet. That's really foundational to everything. Just one other example. 20 years ago, it was very unusual if I spoke to someone in another country on a professional basis. Today, I routinely have phone calls every day with people in 3, 4, or 5 different countries. So really, at this point, science no longer knows any borders, especially science around things like climate change. There are no borders for that. And publication also no longer knows borders. And part of what's driving this global growth is not just the internet as what some people will call plumbing for the communication of information, but XML as a layer above that is very, very important. So I recognize that this is the end of the day. I'm not going to bore you with a lot of technology, but I'll give you just a little bit of taste of what's involved with XML. Alvaro kindly just read my biography, so I won't spend much time on this. But where I want to start with this is a basic assumption that in 2017, having XML as part of a scholarly publishing workflow for journals and books is an important part of the workflow. Why do we need it? Why can't we just use PDF? Well, first of all, to present your articles in HTML. Second, for responsive design. If I try to read a PDF on my phone, it just doesn't work very well. It's not a good experience. With XML, we can have richer hyperlinking. But much more important than all of this is that a lot of your journals now are online only. How many of you publish only online, you don't do print? I see a lot of hands going up. Have you thought about what happens to that 100 years from now? Who's responsible for archiving that information? Well, up until 20 years ago, major research libraries would just buy subscriptions to every single journal, and they had very deep stacks, and that was a global archive for the future. For 100, 200 years, you can always read print. But electronic archiving is a very different story. And so it's important to have formats that we know that 100 years from now we can definitely read. XML is that format. PDF, we're not so sure about. In addition, XML can help drive feeds of metadata. So if you need to get your metadata to Cielo, to PubMed Central, to Crossref, XML makes that much easier and much more accurate. And finally, with all of the new metadata requirements that keep appearing for publishers, I assume most of you are involved with DOIs and doing deposits to Crossref, but now we're all looking at ORCID, as Philippa just pointed out. Credit, she didn't name it by that name, but authors getting credit for the different parts of the research that they've done in the article, and tracking funding information. Funders now want to have a little dashboard where they can find out all the articles that have been published tied to a specific grant number. This is information that's much harder to do if you're in a print-only or PDF-only world, but with XML, it becomes much easier. But there's more than just all of these publishing advantages to working with XML. Because, excuse me, when done right, XML in the workflow can actually improve your publishing efficiency, and it can actually reduce your publication costs. Here's how it works. XML requires thoughtful choices. Unfortunately, for all of you who are fans of the Harry Potter series, there's no magic wand. You wave your magic wand and you have XML. It's not that simple. It does require re-engineering the publication workflow. It is fundamentally a software problem, so it requires new software tools. We recommend some additional training for your production staff, and ultimately it requires some thoughtful choices. So At a much more practical level, where can you add XML into the workflow? There are fundamentally 4 places, no more, no less, where XML can be added. At the authoring stage, before copy editing, before you do page layout, composition, or after you do the publication. I'm going to look at each of these in more detail. Each has advantages and disadvantages. I'm a technology geek. I've been deeply involved in electronic publishing for 35 years. And the original vision of XML was that we wouldn't be working in Microsoft Word. Everyone would write in something that could produce XML. And then editors would edit those articles in XML, and then we would have what's called single source publication. So you push one button, you get your print or PDF version. You push another button, you get HTML. You push a third button, you get your EPUBs. Push another button, you drive your metadata feeds. And I'm going to break away for a moment and just show you a website. This is the Bulletin of the World Health Association, published out of Geneva. And you'll notice that for every article that they have here, we have not just the abstract in HTML, the full text. We have a PDF. We also have DAISY format for people who are visually impaired. We have EPUB format, and we have Kindle format. All of these are produced automatically from the XML. And so when you have XML, it opens up opportunities for many more types of publication. So that was the original dream. But the reality is that authors use Microsoft Word. Maybe if they're in physics, they use LaTeX, but most authors use Microsoft Word. And these authors are absolutely brilliant subject matter experts. They know their science really, really well. And it turns out the smarter they are at science, the stupider they are with how they use Microsoft Word. I'll give you an example. I saw a paper not that long ago where an author wanted to have a minus sign in front of a negative number. And the author was smart enough to know that a minus sign is different from a hyphen. But they couldn't figure out how to make a minus sign. So finally they typed an underscore character on their keyboard and made it superscript. I'm serious. We have something in our office, we call them word fails. The brilliant ways that absolutely brilliant authors abuse Microsoft Word. So if this is what authors are doing with Microsoft Word, forget about trying to train them to create XML. Forget about trying to get them to create an XML document for you. In addition, authors don't think about structure. And as Philippa pointed out, authors don't understand the production work that you're doing. Another thought that people have had recently is, will people create their XML in an online editor instead of in Microsoft Word? Will they write JATS? So how many of you know what JATS is? A few hands. JATS is the international standard for creating XML of journal articles. How many of you have publications at Cielo? Most of you, okay. Cielo has adopted JATS standard for XML. So if you could get the authors to work in this online environment, it would be great because you could publish faster, you could lower your publication costs, but there are problems with this. Part of it is, okay, so if one journal has an XML authoring environment, but another one doesn't, and the author doesn't know which journal they'll submit to when they start writing, it doesn't make sense to write in JATS. The other thing is that even though JATS is a standard, each publisher uses it in a little bit different way. So Nature Communications, which I know uses JATS, uses it a little bit differently from Science Advances, which I know also uses JATS. So having the authors work directly in XML just isn't going to work. I'll take it a step further. I think authors will continue to work in Word, and if they're in physics and LaTeX, unless you pay them to use something else. Now, we're talking about having, in an open access environment, we're talking more and more about authors paying publishers for publication. So I don't think it's going to work that publishers will pay authors to deliver XML. Okay, so we're not going to get our XML from the authors. I just don't think that's going to work. I don't know of a single publisher anywhere in the world that's getting authors to give them XML. Let's jump to the last of those 4 workflows, post-publication XML. This is what a lot of organizations do today, and it's easy because the author submits a Word file, it's edited in Word, it's typeset commonly with InDesign. You proof those pages, you typeset the corrections, you publish the PDF, and then you create the XML from the PDF. Now, this workflow has one huge advantage. You don't have to change anything. All you have to do is hire someone at the end, give them the PDF and say, could you please, please, please make XML for me? There are problems with this. The first and biggest problem is that the quality of the XML isn't checked. Unless you review that XML file character by character and compare it with the PDF, you have no guarantee that that XML is 100% correct. Second, it adds extra production time and cost. You're doing it after you've already published the PDF. Third, you can discover errors making the XML. XML, you have to make sure that every single figure and table has been cited because you have to know where it belongs. I can't tell you how many times I've seen publications where somebody forgot to cite table 3 and all of a sudden they've gone to make the XML, they discover that nowhere is table 3 cited in the article. So finally, it's just not an integrated workflow, and almost nobody does this workflow in-house. You have to outsource. I compare this to taking a dinosaur and putting it behind the wheel of a car. It's just not a happy integration of new technology with an existing workflow. The other thing is if you hire, excuse me, if you hire an outsourced vendor, you have to manage them. If you hire a vendor and say, please make XML for me, and that's the entire instruction you give them, I'm not going to guarantee that you get a very good result, because I don't think any of you would hire an employee and say, please do this job for me and describe that entire job in one sentence. And then, by the way, never check their work to make sure that the work they're doing meets your expectations. Well, believe it or not, a lot of publishers have hired outside vendors and their entire description of the job is, please make XML for me. Well, maybe they qualify, please make XML that's acceptable to Cielo. That's at least qualifying it a little bit better. But if you don't check that work and Cielo doesn't check that work carefully, you have no idea whether or not it's being done correctly. So you have to, if you hire vendors, you want to give them very clear and detailed instructions. And there's an old Russian proverb, trust but verify. You want to make sure that they're doing their work correctly. The third of these workflows is XML first. In this one, the author submits a Word file, but now when it immediately has been accepted, you convert it to XML. And then you do all the editing in XML, you typeset from the XML, so you have XML all the way to the last stage. And you make your PDF from that XML. This is a critically important step, because now you're proofing a PDF made from the XML so you know that the PDF will be correct. This workflow has some advantages, the biggest of which I just mentioned. You're making the PDF from the XML. And the file is continually checked against the required structure. So you know that table 3 has to be cited. But there are disadvantages. It means that your entire editorial operation now has to function in XML. You have to give everyone in your editorial and production operation XML training. You might have to customize an XML system, which can be very expensive. This is something New England Journal of Medicine has done, but with their impact factor, they can afford to do anything they want with technology. Most of us don't have that kind of resource to spend on technology. And freelance copy editors aren't practical in this workflow because you have to give them the XML software as well. So the last of these 4 workflows is what I call the XML middle workflow. In this, the author submits a Word file. It's accepted and then everything is done in Microsoft Word. So you do the cleanup in Word, you do the editing in Word, and then you convert to XML just before you do the page layout, just before composition. You make the PDF from the XML, and here's where it gets more interesting. What you now do is, when you have corrections, you make them in Word, you make new XML, and then you make a completely new PDF. Now, if any of you have ever worked with InDesign, you're probably thinking, I've just thrown out all that work I've done with InDesign. That's very expensive. Well, there are ways that you can take XML and automate the page layout. So when you generate new XML, you can have new pages in just a minute or two. You don't have to do all of that manual work, particularly for setting up tables and placing figures. So the advantages of this workflow are that you keep the article in Microsoft Word as long as possible. You minimize the number of people who are working with XML, so you have lower training costs. Freelance editors are still practical because you're still working in XML. I'm sorry, you're still working in Word. But because you go to XML before you make the PDF, you have the structure enforced before the content is final, before the information is final. And in some environments now, we're starting to see systems where the authors can actually make corrections directly in the XML. Many of the offshore vendors that we've seen, from India, many of the vendors in the United States are now creating systems like this. The biggest disadvantage of this workflow, it does either require running an application in-house that you can use to create the XML, or it requires hiring a vendor who has an application like that and who can typeset from the XML. But the impact of this can be huge. So there are, excuse me, a number of There are a number of publishers that I've worked with over the years that have been able to improve their workflows by adopting these XML middle workflows. So the Federation of Animal Science Societies, before they adopted an XML workflow, an XML middle workflow, their shortest time to publication was 43 days. Their longest was about 110, depending on which journal it was. These are 3 different journals. After they adopted the XML workflow, they were publishing everything in less than 40 days from acceptance. It's a huge, huge improvement in productivity. And interestingly, the journal that saw the biggest improvement was the most math-intensive journal. That was one they thought would be the biggest challenge. Another organization we work with is a much higher volume publisher. They used to do, in 2009, excuse me, 120 books per year and 50 journals. 3 years later, they had tripled those numbers, 350 to 360 books per year and 145 journals, all with the same staff. They didn't add a single staff person. So this is the kind of efficiency and cost reduction that this can lead to. And finally, the American Academy of Orthopedic Surgeons was able to publish 3 600-page textbooks. This is just last year, in 6 months. Previously, they would do 1 textbook in 9 months. So they're able to compress their publication schedules and publish much more effectively. So the benefits of having what I call an XML write workflow, meaning it's not the authors and it's not post-publication, but it's either XML first or XML middle, is first and most importantly that you create the PDF from the XML so the quality of the XML is guaranteed to be right. You can have richer PDFs. All of a sudden you'll discover things like internal hyperlinks. So a citation to the reference list becomes a live hyperlink very easily in this workflow. Quality checks are completed up front. And ultimately, you have faster production time. I want to give you a couple of quick demonstrations to show you how some of this can work. This is a Microsoft Word file that was published by the World Health Organization. And you'll notice that we have paragraph styles applied that describe each of the paragraphs, not just in the front matter, but throughout the document. So heading A for a level 1 head, and so on. We have in the document color coding, for example, where we have callouts to figures and tables, so that this information can be used to create the XML. And if we go to the very bottom, we have tables in here. We also have references, and these are highly color-coded and also include links to both Crossref and PubMed. Now, all of this color coding, all of these links, that's all been done automatically, and I'm not going to show you those steps, but what I will show you is just quickly the last step here is to apply the same color coding to the author line of this manuscript, because all the authors need to be broken down by surname and given name. So the trick is to have automated processes for driving all of this, and then from that, once you have really not very complicated markup in the Word file aside from the references, those are admittedly complicated, you can then convert this file from Microsoft Word to XML. So this is using third-party software, a plugin to Microsoft Word to do this, but the idea is that it can actually be a very easy workflow. And this tells us that our XML actually is valid, it matches all the rules, and now I won't drag you through the tags, but when you see something like that, most of which does not look like either English or Portuguese, that's the kind of thing you don't want to do by hand. And then this XML can be taken, and with another third-party tool, I have just a little video that's running here, you can take this and you can automatically move it into InDesign and have pages laid out. There are also other tools that are independent of InDesign that will do the same thing, although doing it with InDesign is the most elegant way to do it. And this happens very quickly, and it does things like all of the figure placement and all of the table placement, so that you don't have to spend a lot of manual time working in InDesign. And so all of this can work to create a much more efficient workflow. So, in terms of that efficiency, you may be asking, well, what are the specifics that help me with this? Well, one is that errors are caught earlier in the workflow. So I'll give you another quick example here. One of the tools that we have is a little online tool called Edifix. And what Edifix can do, let me actually see if I can get a better screen resolution here. Here we go. What Edifix can do is I can just take a list of references from Microsoft Word and copy and paste them into a web form. And I'm actually going to select an editorial style here. I suspect that Vancouver ICMJE is a very common, popular style. And then this gets sent off to a server. And what's happening is it's doing several things to the references. The first is it's taking them apart, no matter what style the author used, or even if the author didn't use a consistent style. It's taking them apart into their little bitty pieces. So initials, surnames, article title, journal name, page number, volume number, and so on. And once it's taken them apart, puts the references back together again using a specific template, in this case, ICMJE style. But then it can link the references to both PubMed and Crossref, and not only give you back links, but in addition, it can correct information that may have been wrong in the reference. So in this first reference, first of all, Armstrong-Schellenberg had a hyphen in the original. It's been corrected with information from PubMed so that there's no hyphen in the surname. Or the last page number, the page range here was 123-22. That's an illogical page range. And it was corrected automatically with information from PubMed to 123, and actually that's now an N-4. And the issue number, which is required by ICMJE style, has automatically been added, so we can see that in this difference. And in fact, I can click through on the link and go directly to the abstract on PubMed. And there are all kinds of interesting things that can happen here. In this particular reference, the author had the journal name Parasitology Today. Turns out they didn't even have the name right, but even with the wrong name, we were still able to link the reference to PubMed and Crossref and now correct the reference. So this can give you a much more accurate result. We can even do things such as warn when an article has been retracted, so that you can detect when there are problems in a reference list long before an article is published. You can then take this result and you can export it to a number of different formats, including right back into Microsoft Word or to XML. So the single hardest part of creating XML is doing the reference list if you're doing the full text of the article, and here's a nice, easy way with an online service to get the XML of that reference list, along with having your references cleaned up and corrected. So there's a lot that can be done in terms of catching errors in the workflow automatically by using software tools. As I showed you with the video, the page layout can be automated, which can add efficiency, and ultimately you can have a more efficient correction cycle. There are also the editorial benefits, as I showed you with the reference list, or some of the cross-checking that you can now do automatically when you're applying software. And this leads, again, to automatically improving what a computer can do well, meaning that the copy editor can now focus their time and attention on the actual readability of the text, not on the little minutia problems that can be done with a computer. And the other thing about a workflow like this is when you make the corrections in this workflow, particularly the XML middle one, what you're doing is correcting the Word file. And if you think about your editorial office, even your least expensive person in that office probably knows how to use Microsoft Word. So they can enter the corrections in, and then you reconvert that Word file to XML, and as I said, you can then automatically create pages from that XML. So adding XML into the workflow can have a huge number of benefits. The biggest drawback, as I said earlier, is that you may be a publisher that just can't afford these tools. You may feel that you're not a big enough operation. So what do you do either if you're a small publisher and you don't want to do this in-house, or sometimes people are being published by larger publishers, Springer Nature, Elsevier, Wiley. Well, there's still some questions you should ask. First of all, you should go to your vendor, and I know there are some in the room. Alvaro is one, Luciano is another. You should go to your vendor and ask them some questions. Do you create the XML before or after laying out pages? If they tell you before, that's a really good thing. Ask them for a little more detail. What's your process for creating the XML? How much of it's automated? Because the more automation they have, the better. Ask them what kinds of quality checks they perform on that XML to make sure that they're doing things well. For example, if your journal is in PubMed Central, you want to ask them if they're running the PubMed Central style checker. And finally, if you want to be really curious about it, ask them for a demonstration. Visit their, Alvaro, Luciano, I'm sorry if I'm putting you on the spot. I'm encouraging people to visit your offices, because that's a great way to learn more about this, because doing this nuts and bolts technology isn't something that most of you are going to do on a daily basis, but if you're educated about how it works, and if you're working with a vendor, how they should ideally be working, that's how you're going to get the best quality result for your publication. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take questions. I finished the afternoon with a lot of technology. If you don't have questions, I understand. Okay, there's a rule that you always get the first question from a friendly face in the audience. Luciano.
Thank you, Bruce. Nice presentation.
Thank you.
Pode dar uma ideia de preço dos serviços que você mostrou? Can you give us some idea of prices of the services you've shown, please?
Sure. The Edifix service is designed for use by small publishers. It starts at about 20 cents per reference, but this is US prices, sorry, 20 US cents per reference, but drops in higher volumes very quickly down to 10 cents and even less per reference, and only the references that are improved. Software like Xstyles and Typify are much more expensive investments. Xstyles has a minimum investment of $12,000, so it's not something that most small journals are going to purchase, but it is something we've certainly seen journals band together in some other countries and underwrite the purchase, where each one of maybe 5 or 6 journals contributed $2,000 towards the cost of software like that, and they created a team amongst themselves to run it. And then from there it can go up, depending on customizations that may be done. So it can be a significant investment. Again, with Typify, they have a couple of models. They have a cloud-based model where you pay per page for PDFs, and I don't actually quote their pricing, so I can't tell you precisely. But if you then want to run Typify in-house, again, it's much more expensive to install it and run it in-house. So hopefully that gives you some idea of the pricing on this.
Boa tarde, tudo bom, Bruce? Obrigado pela palestra. A pergunta é sobre, na verdade, a possibilidade de comercialização apenas do plugin, do Xstyles, para o Word, e algum modelo de conversão, ou melhor, de transformação do Word para XML na nuvem, algum produto que se integre na nuvem, algum modelo de servidor que possa ser instalado na companhia, que tem o Word e o plugin, né, do Xstyles instalado, para fazer esse processo de conversão do documento do Word para XML?
Thank you for the question. There are 2 parts to the answer. The first part is we've had the request from many companies to try to create a cloud-based version of Xstyles that could be a pay-per-manuscript rather than an upfront software investment, and our product team is evaluating the potential for that right now. You're not the first person to ask for that. There are a number of other tools out there that have been designed for converting Word to XML. Most of them, and this will sound biased, but I think most of them are not as robust as Xstyles, particularly when it comes to converting references. We will continue to try to work on creating a cloud-based offering that would be a pay-per-manuscript offering.
Então, obrigado, Bruce. Thank you so much.
Obrigado.
I think we don't have much more time. It's time to, we already have finished it. And another applause for Bruce and thank you so much. Só queria colocar as últimas considerações. Eu espero que todos tenham gostado dessa iniciativa. Foi uma experiência aí que não sabíamos exatamente onde ia chegar, e nós temos muito interesse em dar continuidade. Vocês vão receber, todos que foram inscritos, irão receber um e-mail de avaliação. São menos de 10 perguntas bem rápidas para serem respondidas via SurveyMonkey, um formulário. E eu gostaria de, mais uma vez, de agradecer. Não? Posso ler? Eu queria pôr a tela com os... Não. Enfim, eu queria agradecer novamente os nossos apoiadores aqui, o Hospital Albert Einstein, em nome da revista Einstein São Paulo. Muito obrigado. E isso, a Enago, que colaborou com a tradução simultânea, a Inera e a Springer Nature, que trouxeram seus palestrantes. E também agradecer muito o pessoal técnico aqui do auditório, que foi excepcional, todo o apoio. E espero vê-los de novo. Quem sabe a gente faz mais uma experiência como essa mais para o final do ano, no ano que vem. Vai depender muito do feedback de vocês. Então, por favor, colaborem. E é isso aí. Muito obrigado, pessoal. Boa volta aí para todo mundo.
Guided by a beating heart, I can tell where this journey will end, but I know where to start. They tell me I'm too young to understand. They say I'm caught up in a dream. Well, life will pass me by if I don't open up my eyes. Well, that's fine by me. So wake me up when it's all over, when I'm wiser and I'm older. All this time I was finding myself, and I didn't know I was lost. I didn't know I was lost. I tried carrying the weight of the world, but I only have two hands. I hope I get the chance to travel the world, but I don't have any plans. Wish that I could stay for